Let's begin not with the scandal, not with the whispers or courtroom chaos, but with the woman herself. Before her name became a footnote in one of Hollywood's most notorious cases, Virginia Caroline Rappe was a girl with stars in her eyes and ambition in her veins. Born in Chicago on July 7, 1891, her life began not in the glitz of film, but in quiet hardship. Her father vanished from the picture before she could walk, and her mother, a single parent scraping by, died when Virginia was just 11 years old. She was handed off to relatives. She knew abandonment early and intimately, and like so many women of her era, she learned fast that beauty was currency. It wasn't long before she realized hers could open doors most girls never dreamed of. By her late teens, Virginia was already making waves as a model in Chicago's artistic circles. She posed for fashion spreads, advertisements, and even nude art photography, a scandalous but surprisingly common stepping stone for women trying to break into the entertainment world. Her photos caught attention for their ethereal quality. She wasn't just a pretty face, she radiated something modern, something ahead of her time. Virginia projected freedom, sex appeal, and control all at once. In an era where women were expected to be delicate and demure, she was confident and defiant. She soon left Chicago behind and moved to San Francisco, where she became a sought-after figure in the city's bohemian set. She was fashionable, fun, and unafraid to push boundaries. This was the roaring 1910s, a time when the old world was crumbling, and women like Virginia were writing a new script. And then came Hollywood. By the time she hit Los Angeles in the mid-1910s, the film industry was still in its infancy, but it was moving fast and Virginia wanted in. She landed bit parts in silent shorts and made a name for herself as a fashionable beauty. She wore the latest styles, loved being photographed, and had a natural screen presence that made casting directors look twice. Her roles weren't always credited, but she was working, and in Hollywood, that was half the battle. In 1916, she starred in Paradise Garden opposite silent screen idol Harold Lockwood. It was her most high-profile role yet, and one that proved she wasn't just another pretty ornament. She could act. She could hold the frame. Audiences liked her. And more importantly, producers started too. She was labeled a progressive woman by gossip columns, and they weren't wrong. Virginia openly talked about marriage as a trap. She refused to be limited by what a man thought she should be. She designed her own clothes. She refused to sign binding studio contracts. She was the kind of woman who might be celebrated today, but back then, Hollywood didn't know what to do with her. She was unpredictable, independent, a little too modern. Still, she had lovers. She had attention. And she had momentum. Around this time, she became romantically involved with Henry Lehrman, a producer and director who had worked with Charlie Chaplin and helped shape early film comedy. Their relationship was messy, passionate, and full of promise. Lehrman gave Virginia steady work and a foot deeper in the industry. Some say he saw her as his muse, others say he saw her as a means to elevate his own name. Together, they began crafting Virginia's image, not just as a fashion plate, but as a serious actress and personality. Her beauty was undeniable, but Lehrman and Virginia herself wanted more than that. She wanted to be respected. But Hollywood wasn't built for women like Virginia Rappe. She didn't play the game the way the studios wanted her to. She refused to act the part of the quiet, grateful starlet. She drank. She flirted. She showed up late. She dressed extravagantly. She had opinions loudly. For a woman in 1920s Hollywood, that was dangerous. There were rumors, whispers about her drinking, about her temper, about her romantic entanglements. But there were also truths. Virginia was ill. Throughout her life, she suffered from chronic bladder infections and internal health issues that would plague her until her final days. But in those days, women's pain was often written off as hysteria or worse, sin. What makes her story so tragic is that she was standing on the edge of something bigger. Friends and gossip columnists had begun touting her as the next big thing. She had beauty, fashion sense, a producer boyfriend, a growing list of credits, and more connections than ever. Then came Labor Day weekend, 1921. A party in San Francisco, a suite at the St. Francis Hotel, a fateful encounter with one of Hollywood's biggest comedy stars, Roscoe "Fatty" Arbuckle. Virginia would never walk out of that hotel alive. And the world, eager for scandal, for blood, for a woman to blame, would never remember her for her films, her fashion, or her fight. Only the headlines. But before the chaos, there was a girl named Virginia, a dreamer, a fighter, a woman trying to rewrite her own story in a system built to erase her. It was supposed to be a weekend of laughter, luxury, and pure Hollywood hedonism. September 5th, 1921, Labor Day, San Francisco. The perfect excuse for stars, starlets, hangers-on, and dealmakers to escape Los Angeles and let loose. At the center of it all was one of the biggest names in entertainment, Roscoe "Fatty" Arbuckle. Now, by 1921, Arbuckle was more than just a comedian. He was a king. One of the first true Hollywood superstars, he had helped invent slapstick, mentored Buster Keaton, and become one of the highest-paid actors in the world. He was adored by millions. He was rich beyond reason. He was untouchable. Until that weekend. Arbuckle and two friends actors, Lo Delmont and Fred Fishback, checked into Suite 1219 of the St. Francis Hotel, ready to party like Roman emperors. The suite was sprawling, multiple bedrooms, connecting doors, champagne chilling on ice. Arbuckle had just bought a brand new Pierce-era automobile and wanted to christen it with a celebration. He even rented 3 rooms, 1219, 1220, and 1221, and turned them into one massive, prohibition-defying oasis. Booze flowed freely despite the nationwide ban. And it didn't take long for the suite to fill up with chorus girls, actresses, socialites, and all the usual suspects who sniffed out fame and scandal like blood in the water. Virginia Rappe was among them. She hadn't been invited by Arbuckle himself. She was brought by friends, possibly by Maud Delmont, a woman who floated on the periphery of the film world and claimed to be Virginia's manager. That in itself is debated. But what's certain is this. Virginia walked into that suite on Monday, smiling, dressed to the nines, and sipping on Prohibition-era gin. What happened next is where the story fractures, where fact, rumor, myth, and misogyny collide. We know that at some point during the party, Virginia began to feel unwell. Witnesses say she was laughing one moment and doubled over in pain the next. She complained of her stomach, clutched her side, and even tore at her clothes. One woman claimed Virginia was delirious and screaming that she was dying. Others dismissed it as drunken drama. No one really helped. And then she disappeared into Arbuckle's bedroom. According to later testimony, Roscoe followed her. They were alone for some time. When the door opened again, Virginia was moaning, crying, and unable to walk on her own. Arbuckle appeared disheveled. The atmosphere shifted. Something had gone terribly wrong. Virginia was eventually moved to another room in the suite and laid on the bed, still in visible pain. Someone called a hotel doctor, who chalked it up to intoxication. No one thought or wanted to take her to a hospital. By the next day, Virginia Rappe was barely responsive. Finally, 4 days after the party, she was taken to a hospital. By then, it was too late. She died on September 9, 1921. She was 30 years old. The official cause of death? Peritonitis from a ruptured bladder. But the headlines told a far different story. Maud Delmont, that shadowy figure who brought Virginia to the party, immediately accused Roscoe Arbuckle of rape and murder. She told police that Virginia had been screaming, "He hurt me," and that Arbuckle had violently assaulted her. Delmont's claims were chilling, and the press ate them alive. Within hours, the story exploded across the country. Hollywood's jester had become its devil. Newspapers printed stories of orgies, drugs, and depravity. They painted Virginia as an innocent lamb slaughtered by a drunken brute. They printed photos of her in fashionable gowns beside headlines like, "Starlet dies in actor's orgy suite," and "Arbuckle kills girl in wild party." It didn't matter that Delmont's testimony was inconsistent or that doctors found no signs of sexual assault. The public wanted a villain, and Roscoe was right there, big and vulnerable, an easy man to hate. But what about Virginia? Here's the bitter truth. Even in death, she was denied her own story. She was spun as either a fragile victim or a drunken party girl who got what she deserved. Her health problems were dismissed. Her pain was turned into tabloid fodder. And almost no one in the press asked how a woman could lie in agony for days while the industry she worked in turned its back. The machine of early Hollywood was moving quickly now, and Virginia Rappe's body was already buried under a mountain of scandal, politics, and lies. And for Arbuckle, the nightmare was just beginning. 3 trials, public disgrace, career annihilation. But for Virginia, she never got a trial, never got justice. Only a legacy built on whispers. The door to room 1219 had closed, that much was certain. What happened after that? Well, that depends entirely on who you ask. Because from this point forward, the story of Virginia Rappe becomes less like a biography and more like a courtroom thriller told through the fog of booze, bias, and a nation hungry for a Hollywood villain. The central question? Did Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle kill Virginia Rappe? Or was he caught in the cruelest scandal ever manufactured by a tabloid-hungry America? Let's rewind to the last moments before everything fell apart. According to Roscoe Arbuckle, Virginia had entered his bathroom to freshen up and suddenly began acting strangely, moaning, clutching her stomach, and collapsing. He claimed he had only ever tried to help her. He was confused, maybe even scared, but he denied any violent contact, let alone assault. But then came Maud Delmont. Delmont told police a very different story. She claimed that she heard screaming that Virginia had wailed, "He hurt me! He hurt me!" Delmont accused Arbuckle of forcing himself on Virginia in a drunken, violent rage, and that the weight of his body had crushed her internal organs. Now, here's where things get murky. Delmont may have been the only eyewitness willing to speak out. But her credibility was hanging by a thread. She had a long rap sheet filled with extortion, blackmail, and bad checks. She had a history of targeting wealthy men with scandal and shakedowns. Even the prosecution grew uneasy when she kept changing her story. And yet, her tale had already done its damage. Within days of Virginia's death, Roscoe Arbuckle was arrested and charged with manslaughter. The press went wild. Preachers denounced him from pulpits. Movie houses burned his films. The man who had once been America's favorite goofball was suddenly the most hated face in the country. Meanwhile, Virginia's legacy was buried under the weight of contradictory medical reports. The official autopsy stated she died of peritonitis caused by a ruptured bladder, but there was no definitive evidence of sexual assault. No bruising, no lacerations, no trauma consistent with the violent act Delmont had described. So what really happened? One theory suggests that Virginia had long suffered from chronic cystitis, a painful inflammation of the bladder that flared up violently after drinking alcohol. Some close to her said she knew her body couldn't handle booze yet. Social pressure and the party atmosphere led her to indulge. Others believe she may have suffered from a botched abortion weeks prior, which could have weakened her reproductive system and contributed to her eventual collapse. This theory, whispered in backrooms and medical circles, was never publicly confirmed, but it added another layer of dark possibility to an already confusing tragedy. And then, of course, there were the conspiracy theories. Some whispered that Delmont was setting Roscoe up, that she had brought Virginia there as part of an extortion scheme, and when Virginia unexpectedly died, she pivoted to a sensational accusation to cover her tracks. Others claim that studio executives themselves fed Delmont's story, desperate to protect the booming reputation of Hollywood and offer up Arbuckle as a scapegoat to preserve the illusion of moral decency. There was even a belief that the public backlash was fueled by anti-Hollywood forces, religious groups, politicians, and newspaper moguls who saw the rising film industry as a threat to American values. Arbuckle's downfall, in their hands, became a weapon, a chance to remind the country that movie stars weren't gods. They were sinners, corrupt, dangerous. And in the middle of all this, Virginia Rappe forgotten, mischaracterized, or worse, blamed. You see, as the courtroom battles began, defense lawyers started attacking Virginia's reputation. They called her loose, emotionally unstable, even accused her of being a frequent drunk who brought the whole thing on herself. This tactic, sadly familiar even today, painted her not as a victim but as a reckless party girl with a weak constitution. They ignored her ambition, her real health issues, her trauma, her career, her pain. Instead, her memory became twisted, molded into a cautionary tale, a symbol of wayward womanhood, a tragic footnote to someone else's story. And here's the cruel irony. Nobody really knows what happened behind that door. Maybe Virginia collapsed from her illness. Maybe she was assaulted. Maybe both. Maybe neither. The truth was swallowed by the chaos, the press, and the public's appetite for spectacle. But what we do know is this. Virginia Rappe died in agony and no one came to help her. Not the men at the party. Not the studio heads who had employed her. Not the industry that watched her fall apart and said, well, what did she expect? Picture it. San Francisco, 1921. The eyes of the entire nation fixated on a courthouse that suddenly felt more like a theater stage, except the tragedy being performed was all too real. The victim, Virginia Rappe, already dead and scandalized. The accused, Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle, Hollywood's chubby clown prince turned alleged killer. The audience? Everyone. It wasn't just a trial. It was the trial. And it was about to get ugly. The first trial began in November 1921, just 2 months after Virginia's death. Roscoe was charged with manslaughter, and the prosecution brought forward Maud Delmont as their star witness. But in a shocking move, Delmont was never actually called to testify. Why? Because her reputation was radioactive. It turned out Delmont had a track record of scamming wealthy men, forging letters, and concocting melodramatic tales to wring money out of high-profile targets. Prosecutors quietly realized that putting her on the stand could backfire. Still, her original accusation had already gone global and stuck in the public's mind like glue. Instead, the prosecution focused on a medical argument that Roscoe, in a drunken rage, had ruptured Virginia's bladder, causing her fatal peritonitis. But their case wobbled from the start. There were no bruises or signs of physical trauma that matched the alleged assault. Witnesses from the party gave conflicting accounts, some insisting Roscoe was a monster, others swearing he was just a drunk buffoon. Roscoe's defense, led by star attorney Gavin McNabb, struck hard. They painted him as the real victim, a man targeted by grifters, scapegoated by moralists, and smeared by a media eager to sell newspapers. They highlighted Virginia's known bladder condition, suggested her death was a tragic coincidence, and emphasized Roscoe's complete lack of motive. He barely knew her. He was famous, wealthy, and could have had any woman. Why would he risk it all? The jury deliberated for 43 hours. They were deadlocked. The result? A mistrial. The second trial began in January 1922, just weeks later. This time, the prosecution tightened their story, bringing in fresh witnesses who claimed Arbuckle had a reputation for getting rough with women when he drank. But again, no concrete evidence ever emerged linking him to any actual violence. Worse still, Roscoe's name had already been dragged through the dirt. Newspapers called him a beast, a brute, even Hollywood's demon clown. He was lampooned in cartoons, shunned by the film industry, and denounced from pulpits. But in the actual courtroom, there still wasn't enough to convict. Another hung jury. 2 trials, 2 failures. But the prosecution wasn't done. The third trial began in March 1922, and this time, Roscoe's defense came out swinging. They found new witnesses who insisted Virginia had been in pain before entering the party. Others claimed Maud Delmont had told them she intended to frame Arbuckle for money. The jury finally listened. This time, after just 6 minutes of deliberation, they returned with a unanimous not guilty verdict. But that wasn't all. The jury issued a public apology to Roscoe Arbuckle, declaring him entirely innocent and free from all blame. They condemned the media circus, the rumors, and the rush to judgment. It should have been a moment of redemption. But it was too late. The damage had already been done. Hollywood, eager to protect its image, had blacklisted Arbuckle months earlier. His films were pulled from theaters, fan clubs disbanded, his contracts disappeared overnight. No one wanted to be seen defending him, even if he had just been cleared of all charges. He would spend the next decade as a ghost in his own industry, directing films under a pseudonym, trying and failing to mount a comeback. His name was a curse. His face, once beloved, was now a reminder of everything that could go wrong when the dream factory turned dark. And Virginia? She became an afterthought. Her funeral was modest. She was buried in Hollywood Forever Cemetery, but her legacy was smothered beneath decades of rumor and misogyny. Some believed she had been a femme fatale. Others said she was a pawn. The truth was more tragic. She was a woman with dreams, with health issues, with vulnerability, and the world never gave her the benefit of the doubt. Even today, when people mention the Arbuckle case, it's often his name that comes up first, not hers. She's become the ghost in the story, but she was real. She mattered. And her death, however it occurred, should never have been used as tabloid fuel to destroy 2 lives and feed a scandal machine. Virginia Rappe's death didn't just end a life, it ignited a wildfire. By the time Roscoe Arbuckle walked free from his 3rd and final trial, Hollywood would never be the same. A dream factory that once sold laughter, fantasy, and glamour suddenly found itself smeared with scandal, corruption, and moral panic. And at the heart of it all, a woman buried before she had a chance to speak, and a man who became a symbol for the industry's darkest fears. Let's talk about the aftermath and the ripple effect that changed everything. When Arbuckle was acquitted in 1922, he hoped to clear his name. But America had already made up its mind. The newspapers, especially the Hearst Empire, had made a fortune from the story. Public outrage had been stoked to a fever pitch. Preachers thundered from pulpits. Women's clubs staged protests. Congressmen floated bills to shut down Hollywood altogether. Whether or not Roscoe was guilty no longer mattered. The world needed a villain, and Hollywood needed a fall guy. Studios scrambled to save themselves. This wasn't just about Arbuckle. It was about all the sins piling up behind the silver screen. Drug affairs, secret rumors of orgies. In the eyes of the public, Hollywood had become a playground for depravity, and Virginia's death was proof. Desperate to salvage its reputation, the film industry installed a new sheriff in town, Will H. Hayes, a no-nonsense postmaster general turned moral czar. He would spearhead the Motion Picture Producers and Distributors of America, MPPDD, a watchdog agency designed to clean house. His mission? Censor the movies, control the stars, and most importantly, reassure Middle America that Hollywood had morals. And it all started because of Virginia. The Hayes Code. Hollywood's unofficial Bible of decency was born from her death. It would take over a decade before it became fully enforced, but the groundwork was laid in the wake of the Arbuckle trial. Filmmakers were warned to avoid scenes of passion, suggestive situations, and indecent exposure. Stars were quietly instructed to behave or else. Publicists worked overtime scrubbing stories, planting alibis, and crafting squeaky clean personas. Studios created morality clauses in contracts. If you slipped up, you were gone. And yet, the machine rolled on. Meanwhile, Roscoe Arbuckle tried to claw his way back into relevance. He directed under the alias William Goodrich, a name chosen by his ex-brother-in-law Buster Keaton, who never abandoned him. But the stigma was impossible to shake. Nobody wanted to finance a comeback. Nobody wanted to distribute a film with his name on it. He was a punchline, whispered about, gossiped over, forgotten. In 1932, 10 years after his trials, Warner Bros. Finally offered him a break, a starring role, a chance to come back into the light. He signed the deal. That night, he died in his sleep of a heart attack. He was 46 years old. And Virginia? Her name was still being dragged through the tabloids long after her death. In the decades that followed, she was alternately cast as an actress, a model, a party girl, a troublemaker, and a tragic case. Her bladder condition was either a known fact or a made-up excuse, depending on which article you read. The truth? She was a woman trying to survive in an industry that didn't protect her. She was ambitious and unlucky. She had health issues, sure, but she also had dreams. And those dreams were buried under headlines, sensationalism, and the kind of misogyny that made her death a spectacle instead of a tragedy. Even now, her legacy is a question mark. Was she abused, ignored, exploited? Was she collateral damage in a system that only pretended to care? Virginia Rappe deserved more than the circus that followed her death. And Roscoe Arbuckle, whether guilty, innocent, or something in between, became a cautionary tale of what happens when Hollywood's glittering mask cracks. But make no mistake, this was never just one scandal. It was the beginning of a purge, the start of a new Hollywood cleaner on the outside, more secretive than ever on the inside. It was the moment the industry realized its image was everything, and that one dead girl, one ruined comedian, and one courtroom drama could bring the whole facade tumbling down. In the end, the tragedy of Virginia Rappe wasn't just her death. It was what we all chose to believe about it. Her name faded from the headlines. Her face vanished from the screen. But Virginia Rappe's shadow still lingers not just in old newspaper clippings or yellowed trial transcripts, but in the very foundation of Hollywood itself. They called her a party girl, a troublemaker, a sacrifice. But what she really was a woman trying to survive in a man's world, chasing fame in an industry that chewed women up and spat them out with a smile. When the scandal broke, she wasn't just silenced, she was erased, her story rewritten, her truth lost. Roscoe Arbuckle would go free, the studios would go on. But Virginia? She became a ghost, a cautionary tale, a footnote in someone else's fall from grace. And yet in the end, it wasn't the scandal that defined her. It was the silence that followed. So tonight, if you remember anything, let it be this. Virginia Rappe was more than the scandal that stole her name. She was a dreamer, a fighter, and a woman who deserved so much more. Thank you for listening to this story, for keeping her memory alive, and for peeking behind the curtain of Hollywood's golden age. Because sometimes, what's buried was never meant to be forgotten. Until next time, stay curious, stay bold, and remember, Hollywood was built on secrets, and some of them still whisper.